You will be surprised to know that there are hundreds of attacks happens every second on the networks, and many of the attacks get successful. The hackers are able to get the data and they are able to expose it on the internet. They sell it for money. They sell it for fame. What are the different types of attacks? What is the stages of this attack? We will try to uncover this mystery, and we will try to know what kind of different attacks are there, how to prevent those attacks, what kind of security controls you can implement in the network. And finally, we will be entering into the shoes of a hacker. Those who don't know me, my name is Vikas, and I will be covering CCNA, NP, and IE. Please hit like and subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can be notified for the upcoming videos. I want you to be expert of networking. Let's get started. What are the stages in the attack cycle? There are 7 stages in the attack basically. So you have to only prevent one of the stages to ensure that the attack is not successful. The number 1 stage is recon. It's also called reconnaissance. In this phase, what attacker does, he tries to capture the information which is available publicly. It is available using the DNS. He tries to gather the information as much as possible so it's easier for him to penetrate into the network. In the second phase of the attack, he will be weaponizing this whole information. For example, what are the IP addresses? What are the DNS? How this malware will be communicating in the network? How the attack is going to happen? This all part comes in the weaponize. In this phase, he will equip the malware or any kind of tool how to attack the system. The third phase of the attack is the delivery. In this one, he will be finding out the way to deliver this malware or exploit into the network so that he can control the network, he can do the further damage, he can do the penetration into the network. Basically, it will act as a backdoor for him so that he can enter into the network without any kind of authentication, and he will be trying to penetrate into the servers basically. The phase 4, what happens in this phase is it's an exploitation phase. In this one, he have all that information to exploit that vulnerability, which will be allowing him to penetrate further into the network. He have to exploit some vulnerability to come in. For example, if the firewall is not updated or the antivirus is not updated, it's a vulnerability for him. So he will exploit that information and tries to come into the network. Once he exploits that vulnerability, this is the time he wants to deliver the malware. This malware is going to give him the backdoor into the network. It could be persistent, it could be on demand, or it could be just one-way communication. For example, it will be just taking all that sensitive information, finding out who are the administrators in the network or finding out the database servers and send this whole information to their centralized server. The next phase is installation phase. So once the vulnerability is successfully exploited, he will be installing the malware on the network to create the backdoors for him. The next phase, in this phase, what's going to happen is he will be getting full control on the network, or he will try to escalate his privileges in the network so that he can have better controls on the network. For example, if I have penetrated into the network using any vulnerability and now I have user credentials, which is just a normal user. With this normal user, you cannot do a lot of things in the network. But who will be the right target in this infrastructure is the administrator of the network. I need the credentials of that username and password for that guy. So what I will do is I will try to sniff the network. I will try to find out who is the administrator. I will get this whole information. Finally, I will be capturing that information and use it against the system. That is one way. Second is I can try to escalate my privileges by using another exploit or exploiting another vulnerability and escalate my privileges in the network. In this whole attack cycle, you just have to prevent one of the attacks. The last stage, he has successful attack basically. He successfully got what he wants. So out of this whole phases, what you have to do, you just have to prevent one of the phase to properly get executed. For example, you can stop the delivery phase, you can stop the exploitation phase, you have the controls over installation, and you can even have control over the command and control. You have 4 stages where you can stop this attacker or stop this hacker coming into the network. Reconnaissance and weaponized, technically you cannot stop it. You have to connect to the internet. Let's look into the important terminologies in cybersecurity. For example, what is a vulnerability? What is an exploit? And what is a threat? What is a vulnerability? Vulnerability is a state of exposing yourself to the outside world, either emotionally or physically, so that someone can attack you. This is a vulnerability. Let's take an example of a car. What is the vulnerability in that car? Someone can steal your keys, someone can have duplicate keys, or someone can even smash the window and have unauthorized access into your network. Your car has a lot of vulnerabilities. Similarly, your networks have a lot of vulnerabilities as well. So what is an exploit? You have attack surface, which is basically a vulnerability. Now, there should be some tools or code or softwares to attack this vulnerability. Let's take in this example, the hammer is an exploit. This exploit can be used to damage the window and get access to the car. The third thing is the threat. What is a threat? Threat is someone who has some intention to do that damage, or someone has some kind of benefit out of that damage. For example, if I'm the hacker, I will not hack everywhere. I need to have some kind of motive behind this. In our example, someone has to take this hammer and smash the window to get inside. So this is basically a threat. Someone used that exploit against this car to access it. In this whole example, we have the vulnerability which got exploited, and someone was there who acted as a threat and got the unauthorized access to the device. Similarly, in the networks, this happens. How these vulnerabilities comes in. Every software have the vulnerabilities. When it crosses a limit of, let's say, 1 million lines of code, it will double the vulnerabilities in that network. There will be a lot of zero-day attacks. There are a lot of unpatched systems. When you will be studying certified ethical hackers, you will notice that there are a lot of systems vulnerable. And there are a lot of exploits available which can be utilized to attack the system. I will be covering CEAT, so please subscribe to the channel so you can see how these attacks can be performed. What are the different types of cybersecurity attacks are there in the network? It could be virus, it could be worms, it could be Trojans, it could be social engineering attacks, there could be DDoS attacks, there could be spamming. There are a lot of activities can be performed when it comes to cybersecurity attacks. There are a few important ones which you should understand. For example, what is a virus? Virus is a piece of code or software or tool which gets installed on your system and becomes part of your operating system. It can replace the legitimate files and copy itself there. But there is a drawback in the virus. What is that? Virus requires some human interaction in that one. For example, it cannot come automatically into your system. Someone has to do that. For example, you can get this one from USB, like CD, or you was downloading something from the internet and you downloaded a virus into the system. There should be some interaction with this kind of cyber attacks. The second form of it is worms. Worms are type of virus actually, but the difference between virus and worms is worms can automatically replicate themselves in the network without user interaction. So that is what worms are. The third type of attacks is Trojans. Trojans looks legitimate software on the internet, and when you download it, it's actually having the backdoor for the attacker. For example, I'm sure you have been using cracked softwares. All right, this is exactly what Trojans does. The hackers who actually cracks these softwares, they put their backlink in that one, and it gives them the access to your machine or your databases or resources. When you use this kind of softwares, it looks legitimate, everything is okay, but it creates the backdoor for the attacker to come in anytime into your network. The fourth category is malwares. I kept malware as a family actually, because malware is not a separate category. Malware includes different kind of threats inside that attack itself. For example, it can have virus in that one, which will be copying or replacing few files in your system. It can have the worms inbuilt in it, and it can replicate in the network. It could look legitimate on the network or internet, and you will be downloading it. So malware is basically a family or it is a combination of various different types of attacks. For example, you have a ransomware attack. Ransomware, it looks legitimate, you have downloaded it on the system. It can replicate in the network, so it's a form of worm. Then you have a Trojan, which looks exactly like a legitimate software. That's how they tricked you into downloading it. And now it can encrypt it, which is basically encryption tools or password tools are inbuilt to it to encrypt your files. Now you have to pay it to get your files back. At the end, there is a very defined goal behind these all attacks. For example, the virus or Trojans or worms, they will be having one defined goal: to give the unauthorized access for the attacker into your system. The question comes in how you can prevent it. You should be using antivirus or endpoint detection and response solutions. For example, coming from Carbon Black, Sophos, Symantec is there, or McAfee is there. And you should be using host IPS. These are nowadays built into EDR solutions, which is endpoint detection and response. You should be using web proxies. The web proxies will prevent any kind of like legitimate looking softwares to be downloaded because they have very vast information of all the attacks happening on the networks, and they can prevent this kind of attacks. Let's try to understand what is IP and MAC spoofing is. In this one, it's basically an identity forgery. In this one, what happens? Someone steals the identity of other legitimate devices on the network, like MAC addresses and IP addresses, to bypass the security controls and authentication controls on the network. This is what happens in IP and MAC spoofing. For example, you have PC1 and PC2, which are communicating properly. Suddenly, an attacker comes in and he starts sending the messages on the network, basically ARP messages on the network that I am PC1. And he has forged the MAC address, he has spoofed the IP address. In this one, what's going to happen if there is any kind of authentication? Now you have the same MAC address, you have the same IP address. You are coming from two different ports. Your switch will get confused between this port and that port. It will start sending the packets here and there. There are ways to make it 100% successful by flooding the switch completely and crash the MAC address table, so that rather than doing the unicast, it will start doing the broadcast on the network. And finally, I have all the traffic on the network, or I can even inject the packet in this whole communication, what was going to the PC2, and I will act as PC1. Now I can send it any kind of legitimate traffic. How you can prevent this kind of attacks? You can prevent it by using the port security. That's the easiest method. I believe it is available in all the switches by default, and you can use this feature free of charge. You can use IPS, which is basically directly connected with the network, and you are filtering this kind of request, and it knows exactly who is coming in. You can use micro-segmentation in the network. You can create basically different zones, and the moment you see there is same MAC address and same IP address on different zone, you will be completely restricting that port. This kind of capabilities are there in the firewall as well, so you can utilize it from there. And you can use even network admission controls. For example, ICE, Identity Service Engine. It's from Cisco. You have other vendors as well. These solutions, what they does is, the moment you connect to the network, they authenticate you, they authorize you, and they assign you a particular identity before they allow you into the network. And the moment they detect that someone else is trying to spoof your identity, it will restrict that port and it will block the attack. The next attack we have is the denial of service. This is an interesting attack because there are many ways of doing denial of service attack. For example, you can attack against the availability of the system. You can do the attack against the software so that it cannot process the request. You can spam the system so that it cannot process the legitimate traffic. There are multiple variations of DDoS. But the most popular, just to understand this whole communication, how this DDoS works, is, let's say you have PC1 and PC2 and they are browsing ipshuttle.com, and suddenly attacker comes in is connected on the network. And when this PC1 and PC2 was connected with this ipshutter.com, they was basically holding one TCP session. TCP session is a three-way handshake. It has to be established properly to start transferring the data. PC1 and PC2 are holding one session. But when the attacker comes in, and he will send TCP message, but he will not send the acknowledgement back on that, and it will hold that session with him. For example, the server was able to handle 512 connections. Now you have one connection for PC1 and one for PC2. But attacker, what he does, he opened 1024 connections and completely sabotage the system. Your system is only able to handle 512 connections. After this one, your legitimate traffic will be also getting discarded. Now attacker has full control over those all sessions, and your system cannot process any legitimate traffic. It cannot serve any web pages or e-commerce sites, or it can be your any blog. So it cannot serve it to the users. This is the DDoS attack against availability. How you can prevent this kind of attack is there are multiple ways. One is you can use the better servers. You can use firewalls, which will be basically flush these all half-open sessions. You can use IPS. You can use cloud proxy servers. For example, Cloudflare is there, or CloudFront from Amazon is there. You can use that kind of services, which has bigger pipe for any kind of attacks. Even there could be multiple systems attacking this one particular host. They are able to handle that kind of traffic. You can limit the session. For example, on the application, you can mention if someone is not sending you acknowledgement for 15 seconds, you will be terminating its session. By this way, even attacker tries to open as many as connections, still you will be having capacity to process the legitimate traffic. You can terminate all the half-open sessions on reverse proxies and prevent any kind of attack to end up on the end device. Now let's look into what is distributed denial of service, or DDoS, all right, or amplification attacks are. In these attacks, what happens is the system is capable to handle maybe millions of requests. So one system cannot take down that whole communication. For example, Facebook or Google or Amazon is there. Their servers can handle millions of requests. And it's very hard for one system to completely choke that whole communication. In this kind of scenarios, what these attackers does? They create the bots on the network. What are the bots are? They are basically infected by the malwares or trojans or worms. So this infected host responds back to the attacker, and now I can send them any kind of command to process that request. For example, I want to attack ipshutter.com and my server can handle 3000 connections. But I have either configured limitation on my server that you cannot open more than 1024 connections, or your PC is not capable to open more connections. In this kind of scenarios, I will send message to my bots on the network or on the internet that attack ipshutter.com. And those bots starts attacking the system. By this way, the attack gets amplified and you have millions of requests coming in from all over the world, which I cannot process. So finally, this server will choke. This is what happens in denial of service attack. How your systems gets infected by the bots? It is basically a type of Trojan. They install it and they have the control over your machine. They can use it for crypto mining. They can attack your systems. They can even redirect your whole traffic and use your system as a gateway. In case any kind of legal action happens, you will be basically investigated. For the prevention of this kind of attacks is same. You need to have cloud proxies or reverse proxies or bigger bandwidth pipes, which will be basically eliminating this kind of attacks. A quick hack for you that let's say tomorrow you face a DDoS attack. The easiest way to eliminate that attack is you can request your ISP to give you a new IP address. because that is where the attack is focused. Hope that attack is not focusing on your domain, because then your system will keep getting choked. So finally, you need to go to like CloudFront or Cloudflare kind of systems which handles this kind of attacks. The next attack we have is the man-in-the-middle attack. Man-in-the-middle attack is similar to IP spoofing and MAC spoofing. In IP spoofing and MAC spoofing, what you was trying to do is you was just trying to bypass the authentication or security controls, or you was trying to do the packet injection in the network. But in the man-in-the-middle attack, what happens? You become someone which you are not, and you tries to capture all that traffic through you. So you can capture any authorized information, for example, credentials, clear text communication, or you can discard that communication, or you can redirect that whole communication to somewhere else. For example, PC1 and PC2 have their default gateway 192.168.1.254, and it's trying to communicate there. Suddenly, attacker comes in and he's spoof the information for IP and MAC of your gateway and send the out messages to PC1 and PC2 that I am the new gateway. In this case, what's going to happen is it has same IP address, but the MAC address is changed. In this way, it will be able to redirect all that communication to itself. From once it's redirected, all PC1 and PC2 starts communicating with me thinking I am the default gateway. And actual default gateway, even it tries to respond back, since I am flooding the network, your message is not gonna reach the PC1, or even if it reaches, there is still timer for the MAC address tables that when to expire that entry. And by the time it is getting expired, I have the entry of my MAC address again. Once all this communication redirects to me, from here I can send them to internet so that you cannot detect I am here as a man in the middle, or I can discard it, I can capture this information, and I can even inject the packet in this one. That is what happens in man in the middle. How you can prevent it? The easiest way is the port security, identity service engines. You can have basically authentication or authorization controls on your network devices. You can have IPS, and you can have even micro-segmentation, which will be detecting any kind of threats inside that particular zone. The next attack we will try to understand is what is buffer overflow. The buffer overflow is interesting attack. Why? Because this is basically a mistake from the programmer that he has not allocated the memory properly. In this one, what happens, for example, you have a form where you are accepting the contacts or maybe a newsletter where you are asking for username or name or password or maybe email address. So in this case, what happens, I open that form, I fill in my first name, and when I'm filling the last name, I fill it too long that your system cannot handle it. You allocated that memory to be 6 bytes, and I sent you the data which is basically 8 bytes. Now the above 2 bytes which is being sent to your system, it will not be able to handle it. So what's going to happen, either your system is going to crash, or it's going to do any unintended action which it should not be, and give the attacker the possibility to exploit this one and get any unauthorized data or unauthorized response from the system. That is what happens in buffer overflow. This attack is very easy to prevent. You have to do the input sanitization. That is one. You have to allocate the memory properly. And even you can use any reverse proxies as well, which are capable to detect that if there is any kind of unexpected data coming in. The last attack we have is password attacks. In password attacks, what happens is you have a login form. It could be on your Windows, it could be on the web, or it can be on your mobiles basically. What is the password attack is there are various ways to crack your password. For example, I can do the brute force. What is the brute force is, I will try all the combinations available in the market and I will try to attack it. Let's say if I assume that your password is 10 characters, I will try all of the characters 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D. Everything I will try in combination to brute force the system. This attack is eventually it's going to be successful. The reason? Because it is trying all the combinations available and it's using different variations as well. How fast this can be, it depends on the capacity of the system and how many attempts you can handle on the server. But this attack is 100% going to be successful. The second type of attack is dictionary-based attacks. Dictionary-based attack is if you're using something which is from the dictionary. In terms, maybe you're using city name or country names, or you're using any dictionary word from Oxford or any other dictionaries. So these all words or most common passwords or common username, they have already clubbed it into files. And this attack will be basically utilizing this dictionary to penetrate into the system. For example, my username is Vikas and my password is 12345. And this is one of the most common password in the world. It will be very easily getting cracked. I don't need to guess it. My system will keep trying it. Using the dictionary attack, it will find out the password for me. The third way of cracking the password is social engineering. I can give you a call and maybe ask you that, can you give me your credentials, and I'm from IT department or I am from the bank and I want to secure your account. There are multiple ways of doing the social engineering. We will be having a separate lecture on the social engineering. It's a big topic. The next lecture, we will try to make it on this one. And in social engineering, what happens is you given me your credentials. I don't need to guess it. And this is the most fast and ensures that I will be getting the access to your account. How these attacks are successful? I can trick you into clicking on some form. Let's say you was trying to log in into Facebook. I sent you a link via email that your account is going to get blocked. Please change your password now. You clicked on that link and you provided me your old password. But actually that page was not from Facebook. You given me your credentials. Now I can log in into your account. This is one type of social engineering. The next one is packet capture. If, let's say, I can capture the unencrypted traffic, I can extract the username password. For example, if you are not using HTTPS, you are not using SSH, you are not using SFTP, I can look into the packet using man-in-the-middle attack and find out what is the username password you are using. Always use secure protocols. How you can prevent this kind of attacks? You can use account lockout, you can use login limit, and you can use any kind of IPS, and you can use two-factor authentications or three-factor authentications. Like, what is two-factor authentication is, one thing is what you know, and second is what you have. For example, your ATM cards. You have the ATM card, this is one. Second, you know the PIN. So it is two-factor authentication. What is three-factor authentication? Three-factor authentication is something you are. For example, your physical characteristics. It could be your eye scan, it could be your walking style, it could be your blood sample, it could be your any physical characteristic like heartbeat or anything. That is the third factor, which will be ensuring what you are. You should change the passwords every 7 days, because maybe someone was trying. You should keep changing your password to ensure it's safe. Don't use common words, common passwords. Always use complex characters above 10, because up to 10, I will say it's already compromised. So always try to use above 12, I will say. And even you can consider certificate-based authentication like private and public keys. Hope you got the idea what are these attacks. If I have increased your knowledge in any ways, please hit like and subscribe. I will be covering CCNA, NP and IE, and we will be covering CEH and ECSA to showcase how these attacks can be done on the system. I will see you in the next lecture. Take care.